welcome to another episode of Not Reading for Content. This one is a special one because it marks the start of our second season, which is translations. So for the next 4 months, if you join us, we will be reading translations, and the first book that we're going to focus on is Cornelia Funke's Inkheart. This is a middle grade fantasy, very well loved. It's been published for about 20 years plus at this point. So we're probably the last ones to actually read this book. So if you guys want to join us for a reread, you're more than welcome. And this was originally translated in German. If you're interested in the other titles we'll be reading for the next 3 months after this one, all of that information will be linked in the description. So, discussing middle grade, this might be a book that some are hesitant to pick up, especially if you're listening and you are an adult reader. I think there is a taboo surrounding reading middle grade and YA as an adult, but I think we can argue that there are some middle grade out there that are for all ages. It's just that the age category suggests that middle grade readers can also enjoy this title. So for our bookish bite this week, the question is, what is a recent book, or at least any type of middle grade book that you've read in your adulthood that you have enjoyed, and why did you enjoy it?
Ooh, I think that's a really good question. I have a lot of different answers that I could go with, but I think I'm going to go with my favorite one. And it is one that I've reread, which I don't think I can say about any other middle grade. Maybe one other one, but I'm going to go with The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill, which actually led me to read more middle grade. It's one of the reasons that I do constantly recommend that book. Is it opened my eyes to kind of a new way of looking at books that are meant for younger readers, but can still be really meaningful for adults. This book features a young girl and a witch, and the young girl is abandoned in the woods as a baby. The witch finds the baby and takes care of it. I can't remember what the girl's name is, but anyway, as they're traveling through the forest, the witch accidentally feeds the baby too much moonlight and makes the baby magical. And so some things ensue from there. You learn about the dynamics of the villagers that abandoned the baby in the woods, the stories surrounding the witch in the woods, and all of these various creatures come together in kind of a found family storyline for this as well. It's very sweet, which I like about middle grade. I like the fact that I can go into a middle grade knowing that there's going to be an amount of hope in the story. I don't like a bleak storyline. I like there to be stakes. Don't get me wrong. I don't want all sugary sweet. I want there to be some elements that our characters are fighting and growing from. But I also want a positive outlook on the world, and I think middle grade does a good job of doing that, at least in moderation. I also love a found family with middle grade because I think that within middle grade especially, we are exploring reaching out to new things, new adventures, new pathways in life, trying to figure out who you are and what you can do. You know, the world is your oyster, I think is the phrase that they use. And so I think as an adult, it's very refreshing to see a middle grade storyline in that, because as adults, I feel like we kind of get stuck in our own lane. And sometimes it's difficult for us to reach further heights or other pathways, whatever you want to say. And I think middle grade can allow us to see that adventure is, right through a door that you've chosen not to open. So it's one of the reasons I really have enjoyed middle grade. What about you?
I could not agree more for all of the reasons that you gave. And the book that I immediately thought of when I was considering answering my own question was Bright Storm by Vashti Hardy. I've also reread this in the last year, so I think that that speaks to how great both of these books are that we're recommending to you all. This is part of a series. My favorite in the series, if you're interested, is actually the second book, Dark Whispers, but Bright Storm follows twins in this sci-fi fantasy world, the age of exploration. Their father is lost on an expedition, and his reputation is also very harmfully tarnished. Our main characters basically decide to go off on a journey. They also experience found family with the crew that joins them on this expedition to find more answers, to figure out what actually happened to their father, and if what the story is true or not, if actually he did do something dastardly, or if it's all a misunderstanding, whatever the case is. I loved the fact that this book is also quite sweet. There's humor, there is a lovable cast of characters that you just want to root for. And with middle grade, what's really nice is you tend to be able to 100% expect a happy ending in some form. But with that said, as mentioned, these characters are dealing with loss, the grief of losing their father suddenly. We're also discussing in this exploration age a lot of climate fiction. So the discussion of when you're exploring, can you do so without harming the environment or taking advantage of resources and people that are not your own? And what's really lovely about this is because middle grade can be heartwarming, it can be very hopeful and lovely, it also teaches our middle grade audiences some really important life lessons so early on in kind of abstract ways. So I'm always really impressed when an author can write a book at middle grade level. And I am so grateful to know that there are 10, 11, 12-year-olds reading the story, and hopefully it's molding them into good human beings. But what I agree with you on additionally is that these can be really escapist and great palate cleansers. And now I'm realizing why I tend to call middle grade palate cleansers. I usually recommend that if someone's had a really hard hitting book, like you said, maybe one that's kind of left you depressed or really emotional, or just a really complex narrative too. One that might be, you know, a chonky read. Maybe it's a really tough sci-fi novel or a really tough, complicated fantasy novel. I always say, hey, why don't you pick up a middle grade book? That could be a great way to prevent a reading slump, and you're just there for enjoyment, even though there are those subtle, you know, elements of some really important topics. So I think that middle grade is really impressive and probably really hard to write for, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah.
But there it is. So if you agree with us, please write in. Let us know your own thoughts and share your own recommendations, middle grade that you've loved as an adult, because we've just given you two. Now I think you need to do us the same favor and provide us with recommendations along the way. But what we really are here for is to discuss middle grade, as in Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. And for that, we should probably start with the synopsis. Danny, I think you have that.
I do. I actually am lucky enough to have a library copy of Inkheart. They had it for me. I am going to be reading this via audiobook and physical, so I will be immersion reading it, which I'm really excited for. And this is quite a chunky fantasy, like middle grade fantasy. So I'm excited that we're reading a chunky book. This says, one cruel night, Maggie's father reads aloud from a book called Inkheart, and an evil ruler escapes the boundaries of fiction and lands in their living room. Suddenly, Maggie is smack in the middle of the kind of adventure she's only read about in books. Maggie must learn to harness the magic that has conjured this nightmare, for only she can change the course of the story that has changed her life forever. So we have a book within a book, which I love. I think that's great.
I love a biblio story. And you know what's weird? As soon as there was the mention of a character jumping out of a book, I think that both of us probably have read titles that have included that concept, but none of those came to mind. I immediately thought of Jumanji. What? All I could think of is Robin Williams jumping out of the board, and obviously more chaos and everything else ensuing prior to that and after that, for those who, you know, not to spoil the movie for everybody if you haven't seen it. So that's really fun. And does that suggest that this is a kind of like modern real world scenario where fantasy elements is being brought into the real world?
Yeah, and what specifically about this book allowed that to happen? Because it does say Maggie must learn to harness the magic that has conjured this nightmare. Well, where'd the magic come from?
Yeah. Was it from her, or did you say, was it her grandfather who was reading the story aloud to her?
It was her father.
Her father. So if he was reading the story aloud, is he the one who somehow brought this magic to pass, or is the book itself magical? And by reading it, you then somehow trigger the magic to happen? So there are questions that I have.
Yeah. Well, to answer those questions, we have to read. which means you guys also have to read if you would like to read along with us or reread, or just follow along for the discussions if you guys want. We will be reading chapter 1 through chapter 18 and discussing it next Friday. So we would love to have you guys along with us. For those of you who are planning out your calendars, if you would like the rest of the schedule for this book, that will be in the description down below. We hope to see you guys next week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. And for reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can listeners find you, Danny?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. What about you?
I have the same platforms. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.